I first met Avelin in ninth grade. By 10th grade, we were already dating and people saw us as a couple. We went through high school without much trouble. It was simple, really. Prom night came and that was when we took things to the next level. After that, we couldn't keep away from each other. We talked about getting married early on, sometime in 11th grade, but agreed to wait until after college. It seemed smart at the time. College changed everything. Back in high school, everyone knew we were together. No one dared step into our business. But college? That was a whole different story. Most of the faces were new. Avelin wasn't just my girl anymore. To everyone else, she was the beautiful, friendly girl who stood out in any room. Guys started noticing her. A lot. I tried to ignore it at first. We were in love, right? We were getting married one day, so there was nothing to worry about. But I started seeing things that didn't sit well with me. We had different schedules, so I only saw her in the evenings after classes or after work. Meanwhile, the attention she got from guys just kept growing. She seemed to like it. I catch her walking across the quad, laughing with some guy, her smile a little too wide. One afternoon, I saw her in the cafeteria with a guy I didn't recognize. She was leaning in close, listening to him like he was the most interesting person in the world. Another time, she was sitting with two guys, and it hit me. Where were her girlfriends? Why was she always with guys? I didn't say anything. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Ava loved me. We were still planning to get married. But there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Fast forward a few years. We graduated, found decent jobs, and finally got married. For 6 years, I thought we had it all. A nice house, good jobs, and a stable life. Things felt solid. That all fell apart one Thursday night. Started earlier that day at work. I was sitting at my desk when Eliza from the mailroom dropped a file in my basket. It was a report for an account handled by Wilder Beckett, an old friend from high school. I flipped through it and spotted a major mistake. The projections were off by millions. Just as I grabbed my calculator to check, Wilder burst into my office, his face pale. "I need that file right now," he said, sounding panicked. "Wait," I told him. "There's a problem in here." "What kind of problem?" He leaned over my desk, his hand twitching. "Projections are off by 3 million, I said. "If this goes to Apex like this, you're screwed." Wilder swore under his breath. "Damn it. Okay, I'll fix it. Thanks for catching that." He grabbed the file and bolted out of my office. That evening, I stuck to my usual routine. Ava always worked late on Thursdays, finishing payroll for Friday. So, I went to Finn's bar for a burger and a couple of beers. It was the same thing I'd done for years. As I was finishing up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend. "Hey, is that Ava at McAllister's? Thought she worked late Thursdays?" I froze. McAllister's was a nice restaurant, the kind of place you went on a date. I typed back quickly. "What? With who?" "Some guy. They're at the corner booth." Didn't want to stare too much, but they look cozy. I didn't finish my beer. I paid my tab and left, my heart pounding in my chest. On the way to McAllister's, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe she was with a coworker. When I got there, I parked across the street and walked up to the window. It didn't take long to spot her. She was sitting in the corner booth, laughing at something the guy across from her was saying. He was leaning forward, his hand resting on hers. I felt like I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them through the glass. She looked happy. Too happy. I thought about going inside, but I couldn't move. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? Make a scene? Instead, I turned around and walked back to my car. On the drive home, my mind was racing. Was this a one-time thing? Had it been going on for weeks? Months? When I got home, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, waiting. She came in around 11, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You're up late," she said, setting her bag down by the door. I nodded. "Yeah. Busy day at work." She didn't notice the way I was staring at her, or how tightly I was gripping the armrest of the chair. That was the night everything changed. I didn't know it then, but this wasn't just a one-time slip. It was the beginning of something far worse. Something that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about her. And about us. By the time I finished my second beer at Finn's, I saw Wilder walk in. He spotted me, grinned, and headed straight for my booth. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, sliding in before I could even respond. He ordered a beer and nodded at Lily behind the bar. "Put his tab on me," he said. "Least I can do after you saved my job today." I waved it off. "You don't have to do that. Come on, man. I insist. You caught that mistake before it went nuclear. You might have just saved my career." I shrugged, accepting the gesture. We sat there for a while, talking about work, old friends, and whatever nonsense came to mind. It was nice enough, just two guys catching up. Then, out of nowhere, Wilder leaned in closer, lowering his voice like he was about to share a secret. "Listen," he started, hesitating. "You're a good guy, you know that? A really good guy. But I gotta ask, why do you put up with Ava's crap?" I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my reaction. "You seriously don't know?" "Know what?" I asked, my tone sharper now. Wilder leaned back, looking almost nervous. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." "No," I grabbed his wrist before he could get up. "What are you talking about?" "Spill it, Wilder." He sighed, glancing around the bar like he was checking for eavesdroppers. "Look, man, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but people talk. Ava's got a reputation. She's had one for years." My heart started pounding. "What reputation?" Wilder hesitated again, but when I didn't let go of his wrist, he finally gave in. "You really don't know? Damn. Okay, fine. I'll tell you. But you're not gonna like it." I stared at him, my stomach tightening as he started talking. Wilder's voice dropped to a near whisper. "It started in high school. You think she was all about you, right? Prom night and all that? Well, 2 weeks after prom, I walked into my cousin Henry's house and found Ava there." "Okay," I said cautiously. "So what?" "So she wasn't just hanging out, man." He paused, giving me a pointed look. "She was with Henry, and when I walked in, they didn't even care that I saw. They just kept going. After a bit, I stayed." "You stayed?" I repeated, my voice rising. Wilder nodded, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "Yeah. And when Henry was done, it was my turn. She didn't even blink, just went along with it. And after that, it became a thing. Henry and I took turns with her whenever you were busy working at Walker's Market." I felt like my brain short-circuited. "You're lying," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I wish I was," Wilder said, his tone steady. It didn't stop there either. "When Henry got serious with Arya Montgomery, Ava just moved on to me full-time. At least, until I found her with Theo Ryland and Owen Parker." My stomach churned. "She what?" "They were a group. Ava didn't just stick to one guy. If anything, she liked the attention from as many as she could get." He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "By the time we graduated, I think more than half a dozen guys had been with her. And we all just assumed you knew. Hell, Chase even thought maybe you were into it." I slammed my fist on the table, startling a few people around us. "Stop," I hissed. "Just stop. You're saying all this crap. But why the hell should I believe you?" Wilder looked me straight in the eye. "Because I was there. And because it didn't stop in college, either." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What do you mean?" He sighed again, shaking his head. "You know her schedule in college, right? Classes ended early most days, and she didn't have any on Wednesdays. You thought she was studying or hanging out with friends, didn't you? She wasn't. Then what was she doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Same thing as before. She had a rotation. Different guys, different days. Wednesdays were her all-day events. And the rest of the week, it was 2 or 3 times whenever she could fit it in. While you were busting your ass at work, she was—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I stared at him, the room spinning around me. "Why the hell didn't anyone tell me?" Wilder shrugged. "We figured you knew. Or if you didn't, we assumed you didn't want to know. I mean, you married her, man. Why would anyone think you'd do that if you didn't already know?" I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My mind was racing, piecing together everything Wilder had just told me. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the guys in college who seemed too friendly with her. It all made sense now in a way that made me sick to my stomach. "Look, I'm sorry," Wilder said, standing up. "I didn't mean to drop all this on you. But you deserve to know." He walked out, leaving me alone in the booth. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my head. My hands were trembling, and my chest felt tight. How could I have been so blind? That night, as I drove home, my grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles turned white. By the time I got to the house, I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this slide. I needed answers. From Ava. From everyone. And I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth. Wilder leaned closer, speaking low, like he was sharing a secret too big to say out loud. "Maybe you and Ava have some kind of arrangement, something unconventional, but nobody ever saw you with another girl. Ava, on the other hand, was often seen with guys." I stared at him, my chest tightening. My mind raced as I tried to process what he was saying. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "If you didn't know about her back then, you probably don't know about her Thursday nights with Max and Luke Howard. Or her Tuesdays with Ethan Clark while you're out bowling." The words hit like a hammer, and I felt my fists clench under the table. He kept going, saying he didn't know who else she was seeing or when, but it was clear that whenever I was busy, so was Ava. He finally leaned back, his face serious. He added that he'd stopped being involved with her after we got married. A single woman was one thing, he said, but a married one was different. He looked almost ashamed as he said it. I sat there frozen, my mind jumping between disbelief, anger, and something worse. Humiliation. I stood abruptly, grabbing my coat. My movements felt stiff, almost automatic. I thanked him for the beer and burger, and for shedding light on things. He just nodded and watched me leave. The drive home felt like a blur. My mind kept circling back to what Wilder said. Part of me wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't true. Ava loved me. She wouldn't betray me like that. But a voice in the back of my head argued otherwise. Why would Wilder lie? He knew I'd verify what he told me, and if it was a lie, we couldn't keep working together. Wilder wasn't stupid. When I got home, the house was dark. Ava wasn't back yet. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there, staring at the empty space. My mind drifted back to those teenage years, remembering how wild everything felt back then. Hormones ran high, and the boundaries seemed blurry. If some other girl had offered back then and I didn't have Ava, maybe I'd have taken it. But this wasn't some careless teenage fling. This was 10 years of calculated betrayal. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, waiting. Ava came home late, cheerful as ever. She asked why I'd gone to bed early and hoped I was feeling better, saying she'd been looking forward to spending time with me. I muttered something about feeling off and needing rest. She didn't press further, and I ignored her touch when she reached out to me, pretending to be asleep. Her hand on my skin made my stomach turn. For the first time, I felt nothing for her. No love, no warmth, no connection. Just disgust. The next morning, I was up before her. The coffee was brewing, and I sat at the table with the paper in hand, pretending to read. Ava came into the kitchen, cheerful as usual. She mentioned how I'd gone to bed early and teased me about making it up to her later. I barely looked up, saying something vague about feeling better today. She kissed my cheek and headed to get ready for work. As I drove to work, the weight of everything settled deeper into my chest. The image of Ava's cheerful face that morning clashed with Wilder's words from the night before. There was no denying it anymore. Everything was a lie. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending it wasn't happening. Ava and I were finished. She just didn't know it yet. The moment I left Wilder, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. Back in my car, I called Leah, an old high school friend who now worked as a corporate lawyer. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but I figured she'd know someone who could help. When I asked for a tough divorce lawyer, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jack, so you finally found out about Ava?" The way Leah said it, so carefully, like she was trying not to sound too shocked, made my stomach drop. That was all the confirmation I needed. The truth about Ava was far worse than I had ever imagined. "No, Leah," I replied, my voice tight. "I had no idea until yesterday." Leah sighed, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She asked if I had thought we were in some kind of open marriage, saying it was the only way she could make sense of what Ava had been doing while staying with me. I told her I didn't have a clue. She stayed quiet for a moment, then finally gave me a name. "Call Grant Foster," she said. "Mention I sent you. He's tough and he doesn't mess around." I called Foster right away and managed to get an appointment for 1 that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, he didn't waste any time sugarcoating things. He walked me through my options, from an amicable split to what he called a scorched earth approach. In our state, he explained, infidelity was a legal ground for divorce, but I'd need rock-solid evidence. Hearsay wouldn't be enough. My word, or even Wilder's, wouldn't hold up in court. "How do I get proof?" I asked, desperate for answers. Foster handed me a business card for Everett Sterling, a private investigator who operated right across the street. He offered to call Sterling for me and see if he could fit me in immediately. I nodded, agreeing without hesitation. "The sooner, the better," I said. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in Sterling's office. The man got straight to the point. He had a plan ready within minutes, but his conditions weren't easy to stomach. "You're going to have to act like everything's normal," he said, his expression serious. "Don't change your routine. Don't do anything out of the ordinary. If you usually have intimate moments 3 or 4 times a week, keep it up. Whether you want to or not, whether she initiates or you do, just go along with it. Right now, it's not about love or connection. It's about maintaining appearances. If she senses something's off, she'll get suspicious, and we'll lose our edge." I swallowed hard, the bile rising in my throat. The thought of touching her after everything I'd learned made my skin crawl, but I nodded. I'd do whatever it took to get to the truth. That night, back at the office, I sat staring at my phone for what felt like hours before finally dialing Ava. We had a tradition of going out to dinner every Friday night and having breakfast together every Sunday morning. It was part of our perfect couple routine, and now it was a key part of Sterling's plan. When she picked up, I suggested Troy for dinner, and she agreed without hesitation. Later, as I sat at the restaurant across from Ava, I forced myself to smile, to laugh at her jokes, to act like nothing was wrong. She sipped her white wine and chatted about her day while I picked at my veal marsala, nodding at all the right moments. Every time I looked at her, though, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything I knew, everything I was still learning. What Ava didn't know was that while we were out enjoying dinner, Sterling's team was at work. His people were installing wireless cameras and listening devices throughout our house. They were professionals, discreet and efficient. By the time we got home, the place was exactly as we'd left it, and Ava didn't have a clue. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, Sterling's words echoed in my mind. "It's natural to want to find the hidden cameras, but resist the urge. If she catches you, everything we're doing will be for nothing." I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, listening to Ava breathe beside me. I knew this was just the beginning, and that the worst was yet to come. Sterling's instructions echoed in my mind. "You'll have to force yourself to act natural, even in the bedroom. It's challenging unless you're a natural exhibitionist. The system is motion activated, so you'll be on camera. Knowing that some employees might see the footage, don't let it hold you back." He explained that there was a switch to turn off the cameras, but he advised against it. "Most people forget to turn it back on," he warned. My advice? Leave the system alone. Act like you're confident and in control. The more normal you behave, the better the results. After dinner, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. I suggested to Ava that we go out for drinks and maybe some dancing. She gave me a sly smile and declined. Instead, she insisted we head home, playfully reminding me that I owed her after the night before. On the drive back, she slid across the seat toward me, unzipping my pants. Her hand wandered, and she looked up at me with a mischievous grin. "Drive carefully, sweetie. Don't crash and make me bite off your meat." I forced a chuckle, but my stomach churned. Her touch didn't feel special anymore. It felt like something she'd done with countless men over the past decade. I hated myself for it, but my body reacted all the same. Despite my disgust, a part of me wanted her to keep going. By the time we pulled into the driveway, Ava was impatient, practically dragging me toward the bedroom. Inside, she made it clear that she expected me to make good on her demands. I couldn't do it, not with the cameras likely recording every second. The thought of being on display for someone else made my skin crawl. Pretending I needed something from the car, I went to the switch's location and turned off the system. I left my phone on the car seat as a reminder to turn it back on later. Back inside, Ava didn't seem to notice my detour. She was eager, but for me, there was no love left in what we were doing. It was just going through the motions, performing out of obligation. Once wasn't enough for her, though. By the time I was allowed to sleep, I'd had to perform twice more. The next morning, I got up early and dressed for my usual run. Ava met me in the kitchen, casually sipping her coffee. She reminded me that she wouldn't be home when I got back, citing a long hair appointment from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. She mentioned gossiping with the other regulars and maybe grabbing lunch with them afterward. I nodded, playing along, but the doubt lingered in my mind. After what I'd learned, her story sounded more like a convenient excuse. I figured she'd scheduled time with one of her lovers, either before or after her supposed hair appointment. Before heading out for my run, I turned the surveillance system back on. Sterling had drilled it into me. Always leave the system active when you're not home. Even though I doubted anything would happen while I was gone, I needed to make it a habit. The switch only deactivated the cameras. The listening devices and phone tap stayed on, running constantly. After my usual 5-mile run, I returned home, sweaty and tense. Instead of heading to the shower, I went straight down to the basement. There, I opened the cabinet above my workbench where Sterling had set up the recording equipment. Inside were 2 receivers, one for the listening devices and phone tap, and another for the DVD recorder tied to the wireless cameras. I pressed play, my hands trembling as the first recording started. A man's voice came through, casual and cheerful. "Hello? Good morning. Are we still on for today?" Ava's voice followed, soft but unmistakable. "You bet. The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we've got until 6 tonight." "You know I can't stay that long," she replied with a laugh. "I need to be home by 2. Any later and Jack will start wondering." The man chuckled. "He's already questioning why you don't get home earlier." "Huh?" Hearing those words, my blood ran cold. The casual tone of their conversation, the way they talked about me like I was some clueless obstacle in their plans, it was like a dagger to the heart. I sat there, staring at the recorder, trying to process what I just heard. There was no denying it anymore. Ava wasn't just unfaithful. She was living an entirely separate life, treating me like a prop in her charade. I knew I needed more evidence, but for now, this was enough to solidify my resolve. Ava had built her lies so carefully over the years, but I was done playing along. Slowly, methodically, I began planning my next move. The recorded conversation continued, slicing through any shred of doubt I might have had left. "Then skip the hair appointment and get over here so we can make it happen," the man said casually, as if they were planning coffee. "Yeah, sure," Ava replied, her tone flirty. "Then what do I tell Jack when he asks why I've been gone so long and my hair's not done?" There was a pause before she added, "I want more time with you too, baby, but we have to settle for what we can get." I froze as the next words made my stomach churn. I recognized the voice on the other end of the line. It wasn't just some random lover, it was my cousin Sam. A wave of rage surged through me. Sam. My own blood. My mind spiraled, wondering how many other family members had been involved. It was a disgusting, humiliating thought, but one I couldn't shake. I went upstairs and paced the living room, trying to control my anger. Ava came home from her so-called hair appointment about an hour later, cheerful and chatty. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more proof. Thinking quickly, I staged a clumsy fall down the basement stairs and claimed I'd hurt my back. Probably pulled a muscle or something, I told her. It was a convenient excuse to avoid intimacy for the next few days. She fussed over me, offering to help, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. By Monday, I had a new plan. I called Ava at work and told her I'd be leaving town for a business trip on Tuesday morning and would return by Friday. I promised to take her out to dinner when I got back, which she eagerly accepted. There was no trip, of course. I wasn't going anywhere, except back to our neighborhood to watch her every move. I knew Ava well enough to predict her actions. During my past business trips, she had always stayed home during my nightly check-ins, acting sweet and affectionate over the phone. But now I doubted that meant anything. I suspected she was cheating in our own bed, possibly while on the phone with me. That night, Ava leaned against me and whispered, "I need something to hold me over for the 3 nights you'll be gone." I forced a weak smile, feigning discomfort. "Still hurting," I said, rubbing my back. She sighed but didn't push further. On Tuesday morning, she kissed me goodbye at the door. With a suitcase in hand, I played the part perfectly, even waving from the car as I backed out of the driveway. Instead of heading to an airport or office, I went to work as usual, staying until 3 p.m. From there, I drove back to our neighborhood, parking a block away from the house. I opened my laptop and activated the surveillance software Sterling had installed. With a few keystrokes, the audio feed from the house came alive. The phone rang. Ava answered. "Hello." "Hey, handsome," she said, her voice dripping with warmth. "It's me. What's up?" came the familiar voice of Sam. "Hubby just left on a 3-day trip," she replied. "Ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me? Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach?" Sam laughed. "I'll take that as a yes," she teased. "I'll call Liam. I've got to head out for work, but I'll be home by 6. See you then." The conversation ended, leaving me gripping the edge of the table, shaking with rage. My suspicions were now confirmed. Ava wasn't just having affairs. She was blatantly flaunting them behind my back, using my trust as cover. I shut down the laptop and immediately called Grant Foster. I told him to have the divorce papers ready by Thursday, explaining exactly how I wanted Ava served. Foster warned me that my preferred method, having her served at home in the most humiliating way possible, would cost more than the standard service fee. I didn't care. She deserved every bit of it. Leaving the neighborhood, I drove to the other side of town and checked into a small motel with a restaurant and bar next door. I planned to stay there for the next 3 days, keeping tabs on Ava from a distance. The bar turned out to be my kind of place, low-key, with a steady crowd of regulars who kept to themselves. It was a strange feeling to smile while sitting there, knowing the chaos unraveling in my life. But in that moment, it felt like a small reprieve from the storm. Deep down, I knew the worst was still to come. The bar next to the motel was a classic country western joint, complete with a jukebox loaded with dance tunes that made the floor come alive. Every night, I noticed a few single women who didn't seem to like the sight of a man sitting alone while music played. On my first visit, I was nursing a beer at the bar when a stunning redhead sauntered over. "Come on, sugar," she said, her southern drawl smooth as honey. "They're playing our song." Before I could respond, she grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the dance floor. We swayed to the rhythm as she smiled up at me. "Don't get the wrong idea, sugar. I'm not looking for anything more. I just love to dance. And you were here." Her name was Jenna. After our dance, she invited me to join her and her friends, Emma and Kate, at their table. I ended up spending the evening dancing with them, laughing more than I had in weeks. Around 10:30, I told them I had to call it a night. "Maybe we'll see you again," Jenna said as I stood to leave. "We're here a few nights a week." "Probably," I replied. "I'm staying at the motel next door, so I'll likely be back." For the first time since my conversation with Wilder, I felt something I hadn't in a while, a faint glimmer of positivity. It wasn't much, but it was enough to carry me through the night. The next afternoon, I parked a block away from my house around 3 o'clock and reviewed the footage from the night before. What I saw confirmed everything. Ava had invited 2 men into our bedroom. They were noticeably younger, at least 6 years her junior. It made me wonder if she was chasing something youthful, trying to relive a past version of herself. The content itself was straightforward, just physical acts between them. The visual of Ava with two men didn't faze me as much as I thought it would. By that point, I was numb to the sight. What truly struck me was the audio. I listened closely, half expecting to hear her mock me or complain about me to them. Surprisingly, she didn't criticize me at all. The most telling part came when one of the men mentioned wanting to see her more often. Ava replied firmly, saying I was her priority. It wasn't said out of love or loyalty. It was more about maintaining her cover. I also overheard her instructing them to leave by 6 a.m. to avoid being seen by our neighbors, who weren't early risers. The next day, Wednesday, passed without incident. The pattern repeated. Ava met with the same two men, emphasizing the importance of leaving early in the morning. They followed her instructions, slipping out at exactly 6 a.m. each time. I decided to adjust my plan. I called Grant Foster and asked him to have the divorce papers served on Friday morning at 5:45 a.m., just before her lovers left. The timing felt perfect. On Friday morning, I parked down the street from the house at 5:55 a.m., waiting in the shadows. Right on schedule, the front door opened. The two men stepped out, laughing as Ava stood in the doorway, wearing nothing but a robe. That's when they noticed the man standing off to the side. He stepped forward, handing Ava the divorce papers with a calm, professional demeanor. She froze, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as he walked away without a word. Her companions looked just as stunned. I pulled up in front of the house, honking my horn to get her attention. She turned toward me, and I gave her a quick wave goodbye before driving off, leaving her standing there in the doorway. The papers served on Ava included a letter from me, making it clear that I never wanted to speak to her again unless it was absolutely necessary. The finality of it all hit me as I drove away. I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was severing every tie I'd ever had with her. For the first time in years, I felt free. I made it clear in the letter. Any communication between us would happen through our attorneys. I didn't want to know why she did it. I didn't want to hear her declarations of love or attempts to minimize what she'd done by calling it meaningless sex. I didn't care for her excuses, nor did I want to hear her beg to work things out because of our so-called love. I was done with the lies and the same tired excuses every cheater trots out when caught. But, of course, Ava ignored the letter. 15 minutes after I left the house, my cell phone rang. It was her. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. 7 calls in total before I even made it to work. Each one went unanswered. When I arrived at the office, I walked straight to my secretary's desk. Nora looked up from her paperwork, and I leaned over, keeping my voice low. I've left Ava, I told her plainly. If she calls, do not put her through. Just say I'm unavailable. Nora's eyebrows raised slightly, but she didn't press for details. She nodded, her professionalism showing as always. As I opened my office door, another thought struck me. I turned back to Nora. If she shows up here, I added, tell her I'm out meeting a customer, and call me to let me know she's here. Of course, Nora said, sticking her head into the room after me. 5 minutes later, I went down to the front desk and spoke to Cora, the receptionist. If my wife shows up, call me first, I said, and stall her. Give me enough time to get out the side door. I'll head to the cafe across the street until she's gone. Cora gave me a sympathetic nod. Understood, she said. As the day wore on, Ava kept calling. 17 times in total. Each time my phone buzzed, I glanced at the screen and let it go straight to voicemail. At lunch, I stepped outside and called my dad and brother to update them on the situation. Dad listened quietly, then sighed. You'll want to tell your mother yourself, he said, but I'll make sure she doesn't try to talk you into reconciling. She's going to try, I muttered. You know how she feels about Ava. She's the daughter Mom never had. Dad sighed again, agreeing. I'll do what I can. By the end of the day, I still had work to finish. With no desire to rush home to my empty motel room, I decided to stay late and clear my desk. Around 5 o'clock, Nora poked her head into my office before heading out. By the way, she said, your wife called 5 times before noon. I told her each time that you'd left instructions not to put her through. I think she got the message. She hasn't called since. I nodded, grateful for her help, and worked until 7 o'clock. When I finally headed downstairs, the lobby was quiet. Cora had gone home, but Clay, the night watchman, was there, sitting behind the desk. "Hot date with the missus tonight?" Clay asked with a grin as I approached. "Why do you think that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. "Because she's outside, waiting by your car." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice even. "We're getting a divorce. She wants to talk, and I don't." Clay's grin faded. "Got it," he said. I pointed to the door. "If she knocks, don't open it. If she uses the intercom, tell her you're alone in the building. My car's in the lot because of a breakdown, and a tow truck's coming in the morning." Clay nodded firmly. "Understood. And sorry to hear about the divorce. I've been through two myself." "Thanks," I said. Exiting through the back door, I circled the block, crossed the street, and slipped into Benny's Diner. I took a seat at a booth with a view of the building. From there, I could see Ava pacing near my car. I ordered the daily special, keeping one eye on her while I ate. Halfway through my dessert, I saw her walk toward the building. She pressed the call button on the intercom, lingering by the door. I could only imagine the exchange inside. Clay had likely conveyed the story I'd given him, keeping her at bay. She looked frustrated, glancing around as if she expected me to pop out from behind a corner. My stomach churned as I watched. Even though I was free from her now, a part of me still struggled with how easily she had lied and manipulated everyone around her, including me. The anger was still there, but it burned differently now, less fiery, more like a simmering ache. As I finished my meal, Ava finally gave up and walked back to her car. I stayed in my booth, letting her sit there for a while, wondering what her next move would be. For me, though, it was clear. I was moving forward, one step at a time, one decision at a time, and there was no going back. I watched from the diner as Ava got into her car and drove away. Once I was sure she was gone, I finished my dessert and lingered over one last cup of coffee, savoring the quiet. The weight of everything was heavy on my shoulders, but for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of control returning. After leaving the diner, I stopped by the bar for a couple of beers. The familiar hum of conversation and the occasional bursts of laughter made for a comforting background. A few women, sitting alone at various tables, cast glances my way, likely hoping for a dance partner. I gave a polite nod but stayed rooted at the bar, focused on my beer. Tonight wasn't about companionship or distraction. It was about letting myself breathe. Once I finished my drinks, I headed back to the motel for some much-needed rest. Saturday morning came quickly, and I hit the ground running, attending to the things I should have handled before serving Ava. A small knot of worry twisted in my stomach. What if she'd already acted on something I hadn't prepared for? First stop was the bank. I emptied all our joint accounts, ensuring every penny was transferred into one under my name. From the safe deposit box, I retrieved my personal papers and certificates of deposit, but left all of Ava's belongings untouched. My wedding ring came off as well, and I placed it in the box for her to find later. The next step was breakfast at the Waffle House, where I worked through the credit cards on my phone. I canceled both joint cards, leaving myself with a Visa and an American Express that were in my name only. Ava had 2 cards of her own, and I left those untouched, knowing they weren't tied to me. The last thing I wanted was for her to run up charges or take out cash advances on the joint accounts. With those tasks behind me, I returned to the motel and parked my car, feeling an odd mixture of relief and exhaustion. I decided to rent a car as a precaution, so I called a cab and headed to the nearest Avis rental. There, I picked up the cheapest vehicle available and drove it back to the motel. The afternoon was peaceful. I lounged by the pool with a book, letting the hours slip by. The sun and the story helped drown out the chaos swirling in my mind. Just before dinner, I turned on my phone to check for updates. As expected, there were 9 messages from Ava. Without hesitation, I deleted them all without listening and powered the phone off again. After a light dinner, I headed back to the bar, which came alive on weekends thanks to a live band. The crowd was bigger than usual, with laughter and music filling the air. I found a seat at the bar and ordered a beer, content to sit and watch. As I took my first sip, I felt a gentle tug on my shirt. Turning, I saw Jenna standing behind me, her fiery red hair and easy smile lighting up the room. "Hey, cowboy," she said with a playful tilt of her head. "Why are you sitting here alone when there's a seat waiting for you at our table?" I shrugged. Honestly, if I'd seen you, I wouldn't have wanted to intrude. It would have felt presumptuous. "Nonsense," Jenna said, grabbing my hand. "Come on." She led me over to her table, where Emma and Kate greeted me with warm smiles. As I sat down, I chuckled. This seems odd. 3 beautiful women sitting here alone and not swarmed by guys. Emma rolled her eyes. "Oh, we get plenty of attention. But it's usually from idiots who assume we're here to cheat. We're just here to dance, and most guys can't seem to get that through their heads. They act like God's gift to women, and we spend half the night fending them off." Kate nodded. "But after the other night, we know you're one of the good ones. You've got an open invitation to join us whenever we're here." I smiled at the compliment but couldn't help my curiosity. "It's not really my business, but why are 3 gorgeous married women spending their nights here without your husbands?" Jenna sighed. "Emma's husband is in the Army Reserve. He got sent to Afghanistan a few months ago, and she was going stir-crazy at home. We figured getting her out of the house would help." Kate added, "My husband works nights, so I'm usually on my own." "Jenna's husband," Jenna cut in, her smile fading slightly. "He's a truck driver, always on the road. Sometimes it feels like I'm married to a ghost." The mood at the table shifted for a moment, a hint of sadness hanging in the air. But Jenna clapped her hands together, brightening. "Anyway, enough of that. We're here to have fun, not dwell on what we can't change. You up for a dance?" I nodded, setting my beer aside as she pulled me to the dance floor. For the next few hours, I let myself get lost in the music and the laughter, enjoying the company of people who expected nothing more than a good time. For the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. Ava's lies, the betrayal, and the mess she'd made of our life together still loomed over me. But in that moment, I could almost imagine a future where I moved on, where her shadow no longer followed me. Jenna took a sip of her drink and shrugged. "My husband's a long-haul trucker. He's off and away most of the time, so it feels like I'm married to a ghost. The 3 of us stick together to keep each other company. We love to dance, so here we are." "What about you?" Kate leaned forward, raising an eyebrow. "Last time we saw you, you had a ring on. Now it's gone. What's your story?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided honesty was the best approach. "I handed my wife divorce papers yesterday morning and left the ring for her to find." Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Does that mean you're free to pursue?" she asked with a playful grin. "Not at all," I replied firmly. "The grounds for the divorce were infidelity, and I won't give her any reason to use something against me in a countersuit." Kate nodded approvingly. "Fair enough. But it does mean we've got ourselves a reliable dance partner for the night." The rest of the evening flew by as I danced with the 3 of them until closing time, occasionally stepping aside so they could dance with other men. Before we parted ways, we agreed to meet up again on Sunday. Sunday was a quiet day by the pool, where I tried to lose myself in a book. On Monday, I drove the rental car to work, careful to park it discreetly, hoping Ava wouldn't spot it and think I was still out of town. The week dragged on with Ava continuing her relentless attempts to contact me. She called 6 to 10 times a day, using her number and occasionally unfamiliar ones. The first time I heard her voice on one of those unfamiliar numbers, I hung up immediately. After that, I stopped answering anything that wasn't already saved in my phone. Each night after dinner, I went to the bar for a beer or 2. Jenna, Emma, and Kate were there on Wednesday and Friday. Both nights, I joined them on the dance floor, letting the music and their laughter distract me from the mess Ava had made of my life. On Wednesday, I danced until 10, but on Friday, I stayed until closing, enjoying the company of people who didn't expect anything from me except a good time. By Saturday, I figured Ava would finally realize I wasn't going to talk to her. Confident she wouldn't be able to find me, I returned the rental car and started driving my own to work again on Monday. That was a mistake. Monday evening, as I walked out of the building, I immediately noticed her car parked next to mine. She stepped out as soon as she saw me, her posture stiff, her expression a mix of determination and desperation. "We need to talk," she said firmly, blocking my path to the driver's side door. I didn't respond. Instead, I kept walking toward my car, my face expressionless. When I reached the door, she shifted, physically blocking my way. "Let me explain," she insisted, her voice cracking slightly. I sighed heavily and moved to push her aside. She stumbled but quickly regained her balance, her eyes wide with shock. Rolling down the window as I got into the car, I kept my tone cold and detached. "Read the letter that came with the divorce papers," I said flatly. "I'm not engaging in any conversation without my attorney present, and any discussions will strictly be about the divorce." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "I don't want a divorce. I don't want to be without you." I stared at her for a long moment, then shook my head. "It's over, Ava. You need to accept it." "I'm not changing my mind." Rolling the window back up, I drove away, leaving her standing there in the lot. Ava's refusal to accept the divorce became dangerously clear the next day. When I left work on Tuesday evening, I noticed two men loitering near my car. As I approached, they stepped forward, flanking me on either side. I recognized them immediately as the same two men I'd seen on the surveillance footage, the ones who had been in my bedroom with Ava. One of them grabbed my arm tightly. "Don't resist," he warned, his voice low and menacing. "Ava wants to talk. Since you're being difficult, we're here to make sure that happens." The other stepped closer, his stance threatening. Both of them were younger, likely in their mid to late 20s. They must have looked at my suit and briefcase and assumed I was soft, easy to intimidate. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I smirked, my mind racing as I sized them up. I wasn't a kid anymore, but I wasn't helpless either. Years of discipline, strength training, and dealing with difficult situations had taught me how to handle myself. They were cocky, clearly underestimating me. I shifted my briefcase to my left hand and made my move. With a sudden twist, I wrenched my arm free from the man's grip, catching him off guard. Before he could react, I drove my fist into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. As he stumbled back, the other lunged at me, but I sidestepped, using his momentum to shove him into the side of my car. The first man recovered quickly and came at me again, but this time I was ready. I delivered a sharp elbow to his jaw, and he crumpled to the pavement. The second man hesitated, clearly rethinking his options. I glared at him, my voice cold and steady. "Tell Ava she's making a mistake. If either of you come near me again, you'll regret it." He muttered something under his breath and helped his companion to his feet. Without another word, they retreated, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was far from over. I knew Ava wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. But I wasn't going to let her control my life anymore. Getting into my car, I drove off, my resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I weighed my options as the two men flanked me. I could resist now, catch them off guard, and make enough of a commotion to draw attention, ensuring their kidnapping plan would fail. But as I considered it, a darker thought crept in. Do I truly want to resist? Ava had clearly gone to great lengths just to reach me. If she was willing to escalate things to this level, what might she attempt next if this failed? Would she become more desperate? More dangerous? Reluctantly, I let them guide me into my car, where I sat sandwiched between them with my briefcase on my lap. They drove us back to the house in tense silence. Once we arrived, they escorted me inside and deposited me into a chair in the living room. Ava stood waiting, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. She instructed the men to ensure I stayed seated and not to let me move. Turning to me, she crossed her arms and announced flatly, "We are not getting a divorce." I tried to rise, but the two men quickly pushed me back down. One of them tightened his grip on my shoulder and leaned in. Stay still, he growled. Ava stepped closer, her voice hard and unyielding. We're staying married, Jack. But things are going to change. Drastically. I stared at her, my mind spinning, but she continued before I could respond. She began explaining, in a matter-of-fact tone, that she had a medical condition that had shaped her behavior for years, something she claimed I had inadvertently triggered in high school. She called it nymphomania. She looked at me with a mix of pity and defiance. I've suffered from this since you took my purity. That's when it all started. I laughed bitterly, dismissing her claim. There are medications for that, Ava. Don't try to sell me some excuse. She nodded. You're right. There are medications. And I've tried them all. They don't work for me. They make me sluggish, dull, like a zombie. And that's no way to live. She smiled faintly, almost proudly. I enjoy being a nymphomaniac, Jack. It's part of who I am. It's why I love intimacy so much. And you've always benefited from that, haven't you? Her words made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay calm. She wasn't finished. I admit, she said, her voice softening, I regret that you found out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Jack. I've always loved you. That's why I've always come back to you. No matter who I've been with, you've always been my priority. I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. Priority? Is that what you call it? Yes, she replied firmly. My actions haven't harmed you, Jack. If anything, I've spoiled you. Haven't I always made you feel loved, cherished, taken care of? She leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You can't keep up with my needs. That's not your fault, it's biology. I had to look elsewhere to fill that gap. But I've never loved anyone else. Only you. Her tone shifted, becoming more formal as she revealed the papers in her hand. I've drafted a postnuptial agreement to make things clear. This document allows me to have as many lovers as I need for my mental well-being. If at any point you decide this arrangement is unacceptable, you agree to leave the marriage with nothing. My jaw tightened as I stared at her, stunned. What exactly do you expect to gain from this, Ava? Besides the right to sleep around with whoever you want. She smiled, as if I'd asked a simple question. You'll continue to have the same loving wife you've always had. The same partner you've been with for 6 perfect years. The only difference is that you'll stop feeling so possessive about what you think is yours alone. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She stepped closer, her voice softening again. Jack, our life doesn't have to change. We've been happy, haven't we? You know this is just about your bruised ego. That's what this is really about, your belief that someone else being involved takes away from what we have. But it doesn't. She reached out, resting a hand on my arm. I recoiled slightly, but she didn't pull back. You've always been more than enough for me, Jack. You're an incredible lover. You always leave me satisfied. But my condition, she trailed off, looking almost pained. It's not something you can fix. It's not about you. I stared at her, my chest tightening as rage and disbelief battled for dominance. You really think I'm going to accept this? She nodded, her expression calm and confident. You will, because you love me, and deep down you know that nothing has to change. I'll still be the wife you've always known. We can still have everything we've built together. But this, she gestured toward the papers. This is how it has to be. I stayed silent, my thoughts racing. Ava seemed to take my silence as agreement, stepping back and folding the papers neatly in her hands. I'm glad we had this talk, she said with a small smile. I know it's a lot to take in, but I'm willing to give you time to process. Just remember, this doesn't change what we've built. We're still us. The weight of her delusion settled over me like a suffocating blanket. In her mind, she'd already won. She believed she could force me into this twisted arrangement, make me accept her lies and betrayal as normal. But she was wrong. I stayed silent, biding my time. For now, I needed to play along. The fight wasn't over yet, but I would make sure she learned just how wrong she was. Ava's words echoed in my mind as she admitted, with an air of smugness, that while I satisfied her emotionally and physically, I could never meet her needs as often as she required. She used this as justification for her proposal, emphasizing that she loved me and saw no reason for us to end our marriage. It was manipulative, but she delivered it as though it were a heartfelt confession. She used my full name, something she knew I despised, to hammer her point home, and with that final nudge I feigned reluctant agreement. I told her I would sign the document, but only after reviewing it and making a few amendments. I voiced concerns about our lack of closeness and expressed how important it was for her to be present in our bed, to show some semblance of the partnership we once shared. My words didn't move her. She remained cold, unwavering in her stance. It was with a heavy heart that I pretended to accept her terms, thinking it might salvage some part of our crumbling relationship, or at least buy me time to plan my escape from this madness. When I attempted to stand from the chair, the two thugs beside me blocked my path, their broad frames and smug expressions making me feel both trapped and powerless. The reality of my situation hit me hard. Ava wasn't trying to reason with me. She was trying to control me completely. I asked to use the bathroom, hoping it would give me a moment to gather my thoughts, but one of them smirked and said I could relieve myself where I sat. He claimed it was Ava's directive to keep me seated until further notice. Ava left the room briefly, leaving me stewing in anger. When she returned, she held the document, reading it aloud to ensure there was no room for misinterpretation. Finally, she handed me a pen, instructing me to sign. I gestured to her hired muscle, pointing out that I couldn't exactly sign anything while being physically restrained. She reluctantly told them to let me up, and I approached the table, placing my briefcase down. Taking the pen in hand, I scanned the document under her watchful eye. Instead of signing, I read it carefully, word by word. Her terms were exactly as she had described, allowing her an open marriage while stripping me of any financial recourse should I leave. When I reached the end, I chuckled bitterly, shaking my head as I tore the document in half. Ava froze, disbelief flickering across her face. I tossed the shredded pieces at her feet. "This is insane," I spat. Grabbing my briefcase, I turned and headed for the door. Ava screamed for her thugs to stop me, and the two men immediately sprang into action. The first one reached me just as I turned. Without hesitation, I swung my briefcase into the side of his head with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling to the ground. The second man hesitated for a moment, startled by his companion's fall, and I seized the advantage. I punched him square in the mouth, the force knocking him backward. As he staggered, I delivered a sharp, forceful kick to his groin, and he crumpled to the floor with a pained gasp. Knowing I needed to incapacitate them, I continued to strike, alternating between kicks to their ribs and sharp blows to their heads. Their groans and wheezes filled the room, but I didn't stop. Years of frustration, anger, and betrayal boiled over, fueling each hit. Ava's scream cut through the chaos, freezing me in place. "Stop, or I'll shoot." I turned to see her standing near the doorway, a pistol trembling in her hands. Her face was a twisted mask of rage and desperation. "Go ahead," I said coldly, taking a step closer. "Shoot me." The tension was palpable. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I refused to back down. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My voice was steady as I gave the operator my name, address, and a clear report. My wife was armed and threatening me with a weapon. The operator's calm voice filtered through the line. "Sir, remain calm and do not provoke her. Officers are on their way." Ending the call, I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked at Ava. "Thank you for making this easier. Your arrest will speed up the divorce process." Her face twisted with fury. "You're a fool, Jack," she hissed. "When the police get here, you'll be the one in cuffs. I'll tell them you barged in, jealous and angry, and attacked my friends unprovoked. It'll be your word against ours. And since they're fully dressed, who do you think they'll believe?" I laughed bitterly. "Do you really think I'm worried about your little scheme? Clay and Joyce, remember them? They saw your goons pick me up from work. They know I didn't come here willingly. And as for your friends, I've got the bruises and surveillance footage to prove otherwise." For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. She tried to hide it with a sneer, but I could see the cracks forming. "You wouldn't dare," she snapped. I stepped closer, ignoring the pistol in her hands. You don't love me, Ava. If you did, you wouldn't have put me through this hell. But don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on that in jail. The sound of distant sirens cut through the tension. Ava's hands trembled, her grip on the pistol faltering. She took a shaky step backward, her bravado beginning to crumble. I kept my gaze locked on hers, letting her see the resolve in my eyes. This was the endgame, and I wasn't going to lose. I accused Ava of having me brought to the house against my will and hindering me when I tried to leave. Despite her companion's failure to subdue me, Ava pulled out a weapon and pointed it directly at me. My voice was calm but sharp as I told her that even if I spent a night in jail, once my witnesses testified, it would be her facing charges, not me. I wouldn't be there to bail her out either. I laid it out for her clearly. The charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and threatening me with a weapon were serious. Her best option was to keep quiet and hope for leniency. But Ava, in her arrogance, ignored my warning. Along with her accomplices, she concocted a web of lies, claiming I had broken in and attacked them out of jealousy. Their story led to my arrest, and by the next morning I was sitting in a holding cell. I called my friend Grant Foster immediately. After explaining the entire situation, I asked him to work with Everett Sterling to gather the necessary evidence to expose the truth. Ava soon realized she couldn't manipulate the system to get me released. I was stuck until my court appearance on Monday morning. But Grant came through in a way I hadn't anticipated. He had a connection in the district attorney's office and managed to arrange a meeting with the assistant DA. Together, they reviewed the footage Sterling had collected, which clearly showed Dylan and Liam holding me down while Ava pointed a weapon at me. Even worse for her case, the ADA heard Ava admitting her plan to fabricate the story and instruct her accomplices to do the same. On Monday morning, Ava strutted into the courthouse, likely expecting her fabricated story to hold. Instead, she was arrested on the spot. Warrants for Dylan and Liam were quickly issued, and by nightfall they too were behind bars. When I refused to post bail for Ava, her parents tried to step in, but they couldn't afford it. Her lawyer reached out, suggesting I use the house as collateral for her bond. I dismissed the idea outright and hung up. I checked out of the motel that same day and moved back into my home, changing every lock on the property. Given Ava's threats and unstable behavior, Grant secured a restraining order against her, ensuring she couldn't come within 100 feet of me if she somehow managed to get out of jail. The temptation to reconcile crossed my mind a few times in moments of weakness, but I knew better. The risk wasn't worth it. Both Dylan and Liam quickly turned on Ava, accepting plea deals in exchange for their testimony. Ava tried to play the victim, claiming she never intended to shoot me. She insisted her only goal was to prevent me from injuring Dylan or Liam badly enough to get myself jailed. But the jury wasn't buying it. The surveillance footage told the real story. Despite Ava's claims of love and loyalty, it was clear she had been trying to protect her accomplices, not me. While the jury acquitted her of felony menacing charges, they found her guilty of unlawful restraint, filing a false police report, and a handful of lesser charges. The judge sentenced her to 9 months in county jail and 100 hours of community service upon release. With Ava out of the picture, the divorce process wrapped up smoothly. Besides losing her, I only had to give up 20% of the equity in the house. Once the settlement was finalized, I transferred the money to her bank account and closed that chapter of my life. That evening, I returned to the bar next to the motel, the place where I'd found a bit of peace during the storm. Fortune smiled on me. Jenna and Kate were there, sitting at a familiar table. Emma wasn't around, and when I asked about her, they explained she was catching up with her husband, who had just returned from deployment. I invited Jenna and Kate to celebrate with me. Why celebrate with us? Jenna asked, her tone playful. Well, I said, leaning in with a grin, I have a hunch. See, Emma's wearing her wedding ring. So is Kate. But you, Jenna, aren't. And there's no mark on your finger suggesting you ever did. So I'm guessing there's no long-haul trucker in your life. I smirked. Plus, I've always had a soft spot for gorgeous redheads. Kate burst out laughing. Girl, you've been caught, she teased. nudging Jenna. Jenna raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress a smile. Caught, huh? Is that what we're calling it? Without missing a beat, I stood and extended my hand. Shall we dance? Jenna didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in mine, and I led her onto the dance floor. As the music played and we swayed to the rhythm, a sense of freedom washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again.